Mommy. That's the woman who's been giving Daddy lots of hugs. This is what my daughter said to one of the women whom we invited over as my husband's colleagues. We had 4 guests total, 5 if you count my mother-in-law, who was only there to keep my daughter occupied while I tended to the others. The other 4 were all my husband's colleagues from work, 3 of whom I already knew because I worked with them at one point before I got married. There was my old boss, his new fiancé, the only one whom I didn't know, and my husband's 2 best friends at work. My daughter had pointed to the woman who was the fiancé when she said what she said, and I immediately tried to scold her. Hey, darling. You can't do that, honey. It's rude to our guest. But my husband had a totally different reaction.
Shut up, you little brat. What did I tell you about how you can't talk bullshit, huh? Keep quiet and stop saying nonsense. Take her away. I really must apologize, everyone. My daughter takes pleasure in being a little mischievous, and she very often lies to her own parents. A habitual liar, essentially. Nothing we can't handle.
I was furious with him, having humiliated my daughter, and was about to raise my voice when my daughter shouted something even more shocking. This is a story of how what ought to be an unfortunate incident turned out to be extremely beneficial for me, and how my daughter was the reason I was able to see the truth and take action accordingly. My name is Susan, and I'm a 30-year-old part-time housewife. My husband, Matt, is the same age as me, and we met at the same company where we were hired the same year. You could say that the air was electric when we met each other for the first time. We both sensed that something about the other was just exactly what we were looking for. We rather quickly got into a relationship, and after about 18 months, we got married. Soon thereafter, we were blessed with a daughter, whom we named Stacy. Soon after our daughter was born, I resigned from my job to take care of the house and my daughter. Stacy is now 6 years old and getting through her last year in kindergarten. She is very talkative, curious, and precocious child. Every day, she tells me about what happened at school that day. We planted some flower seeds today, Mommy. I did the same thing last year, and I give water to the plants every day so that they will grow big, strong, and beautiful. Really, darling. I can't wait to see your beautiful flowers. I can't wait too, Mommy. And also, we all took a walk together. We walked to the park that's in front of our house. You were hanging out some aprons on the balcony, right, Mommy? I told the teacher that's where I live. She said, your mommy has very nice aprons. I was so happy. Did she really say that? So you walk around here, do you? I guess I can't hang up anything weird. I often laughed at the things Stacy said, and frankly, often struggled to keep up with her basic language because she loved to talk so much. And when she wanted to talk about anything and everything, she'd get so excited, her words would blur together beyond all recognition. Nonetheless, seeing her so gregarious and bright made me feel warm inside, and I hoped her growth would keep going smoothly. I decided I wanted to do something productive in my free time during the day, and started working part-time as a cook and waitress at a nearby coffee shop. Matt agreed with my idea about getting a part-time job, and was always concerned about my physical and mental health, and never forgot to tell me never to overexert myself. Although we were away from home during the day, we used to live in an auto-locked rental apartment, and because it was among the newest buildings in town, there were many movie companies coming in and going to the other rooms on the floor. Sometimes, these moving staff weren't exactly completely faithful, and sometimes one of the rooms in our building would be reported to have suffered a break-in. It happened every once in a couple of months or so, which was, frankly, still pretty frequent, so I thought it was necessary to take security measures. The real estate that managed the condominiums and its tenants regularly distributed flyers with warnings and advice about crime prevention. According to a most recent survey conducted by City Council, the most frightening sort of crime, according to the public, is one where the tenants of a condo came home completely unaware that there is also a burglar inside. These crimes very often resulted in the perpetrators getting discovered by the tenants, which eventually became victims of burglary and theft in their own homes. When I talked about these concerns with a friend of mine, who was the mother of one of Stacy's friends at kindergarten, she introduced me to pet cameras. She told me it was a great way to check on your pets while you were away. And more recently, families around the country started using them for their children too. In the event they had no choice but to leave the child at home for a short time, they would use the device as a security camera. My friend said she didn't have a pet, but she could still use it to see what was going on at home and be aware of intruders before they got there. I thought it would be an effective security measure. So I bought one with good reviews over the internet, but it was a hassle to set it up. So I just left it in the box for a while. One day, while I was working part-time, I got a call from the kindergarten saying that my daughter had developed a fever. So I hurried to pick her up. Fortunately, her symptoms were mild and she seemed to be fine. But when I tried to take her to the hospital, all the outpatient fever clinics were full and an appointment could not be made until noon the next day at the earliest. First things first, we went back home to let her sleep for the time being, but her fever continued and she still seemed to be having a bit of a hard time. What should we do, honey? I wish I had some medicine to help, but we ran out.
Mommy, I'm hungry. I want some pudding.
I wanted to give her some over-the-counter medicine to get that fever down, but the container was completely empty. I hesitated to take my feverish daughter to the nearby pharmacy for shopping, and I was worried about leaving her alone, even for a short time. I was caught between a rock and a hard place. Take Stacy out with me so I can keep an eye on her, or leave her for a short time so she could rest. Stacy made things a little easier because she sensed my concern and said,
I can stay home, Mommy. I'm a big girl now, and I think I can take care of me for some minutes. People with a fever shouldn't go outside, right?
That's when I remembered the pet camera. After about 15 minutes, I managed to get it set up, and when I turned it on, hoping everything would be working well, I could see a very clear image on my phone screen. With this, I should be able to go shopping for a short time while keeping an eye on Stacy. All right then, sweetie. I'm going to go get you some medicine, and you're going to stay under the covers, okay?
And get me some pudding?
What's the magic word?
Pretty please!
Sure, I'll buy it for you. And I'll let you have some if you pinky promise Mommy that you'll be under the covers sleeping. Think you can do that?
My pinky promises, Mommy.
I rushed to the pharmacy, got the medicine, then went to a drugstore before going home to get some things we could need in the event her fever got worse. I kept a watchful eye on my daughter through my phone, and she kept her promise. I only saw her get up from under the covers once on the screen. A few minutes later, she crawled back under the covers and went back to sleep, so I assumed she'd probably gone to the bathroom or something. I got back home about half an hour later, and the first thing I did was praise Stacy for keeping her promise. Fed her favorite pudding, gave her some medicine, and she went back to sleep, breathing peacefully, as if her fever had gone down already. When Matt came home that evening, I told him what had happened and that I would take tomorrow off from my part-time job to take Stacy to the hospital.
Oh, so that's what happened. A colleague of mine told me they saw you at the drugstore getting some medical things, and I just wondered if something happened to you or to Stacy. Glad to know it was just a mild fever. So you'll both be home tomorrow?
Yep, I'm going to take her to the hospital.
Good, good. By the way, did Stacy tell you anything strange? Just curious.
Anything strange? What do you mean?
Oh, it's nothing important. Hope she gets better soon.
Matt was genuinely worried about Stacy's fever, but it bothered me that he wanted to know if his daughter had told me something strange, as though it was about something she shouldn't have seen or heard, or something like that. The next day, Stacy seemed completely back to normal, but we went to the hospital just to be sure. She got some tests for any potential infections, and the results showed she was fine. She was given some more medicine before we were sent back home. The doctor told me to take the whole day off before going back to school the next day. I told this to Matt. I guess she was just a little tired. My, how quickly children can get so tuckered out if they get sick.
Aye, that's a relief. You're going to work starting tomorrow too?
Yeah, I took a day off on such short notice, so I kind of owe it to my boss to work a few extra hours to make up for 2 lost shifts.
Good, good. Remember though, don't push yourself too much, but who am I kidding? You know your limits, and you're doing great.
Thanks, honey.
Oh, yeah, I almost forgot. Are we still on for Saturday? You know that plan of my colleagues and boss coming over? I put it all on hold until future's notice because Stacy wasn't feeling so well.
I'd completely forgotten that Matt had arranged a little gathering of some close colleagues of his at our house this weekend. 3 of 4 of people who helped me when I was still working at the company were coming to visit us. I was really looking forward to talking with them about my working days and how things are going in my current life. But Stacy getting a fever caused such a commotion, it had slipped my mind. Oh, of course, invite them, please. I miss them all very much. It would be so nice to talk to them again.
I'm sure you'll also be able to have some fun with us now that Mom's gonna be here to keep Stacy company.
Mrs. Steinberg, my mother-in-law, was coming over to stay the weekend for the first time in a while, and Stacy adored her so much. Friday evening arrived quickly, and Stacy played lots of games with her grandma Pris when she got back from kindergarten. She seemed to have so much fun, but that tired out very quickly too, and she went to bed early after having dinner. I prepared a futon for Mrs. Steinberg and called out to her. I'm sorry, Pris, darling. You must be tired from all of Stacy's excitement. Oh, you need not worry about me, sweetie. I may be approaching 70, but I feel like I'm 30 still. So, you have a reception tomorrow for someone from your old workplace, right? Yes, ma'am. Well then, you leave Stacy to me. I think you deserve at least a beer and some talking time with adults for a change. Thank you, ma'am. The next day, we had 4 visitors. My old boss, Mr. Crispin, 2 of Matt's closest colleagues, Hunter and Andrew, and a female subordinate by the name of Gwendolyn, long for Gwen, who was Mr. Crispin's new fiancée. I'd never met Gwen before, since she was hired after I left, but the other 3 were good old friends of mine, and it was so good to see them again. Mr. Crispin seemed very proud to introduce his fiancée to me, and she seemed a very nice woman. I then proceeded to have a good time talking about the olden days of time when I was an office worker. Andrew and Hunter went absolutely nuts about how much Matt was head over heels when he first saw me, and Mr. Crispin told him the rather funny story of how he met Gwen. I asked after a few other colleagues whom I lost contact with, and I was so glad to hear them doing so well. After a while, however, Mrs. Steinberg, who was watching over Stacy, came into the living room, looking a little troubled, and whispered to me, Susan, honey, may I have a word? Stacy is starting to say strange things, and I'm having a hard time understanding what she means. Oh, that darn Stacy. She really likes to talk a lot. I'll take care of it, ma'am. Let her inside. I invited Mrs. Steinberg and Stacy to come out to join us, thinking that they would like to join in on the conversation. Stacy strode over to me shyly, wrapped her arms around me as I got her up onto my lap, and then dropped a nuke, which consisted of 13 words, onto the nice atmosphere of the room.
Hey, look, Mommy! That's the woman who's been giving Daddy lots of hugs!
If you think that time stood still immediately thereafter, it was worse than that. The air was so frigid. It was insane. I quickly admonished my daughter in a hushed tone. Hey, darling. You can't do that, honey. It's rude to our guests. When I denied what she said, she got upset and said,
It's true, Mommy! She was at our house today, too! I saw her going down the stairs when I was walking in the park with my class.
Come to think of it, there is a park just behind of this apartment building, which was also the destination of my daughter's kindergarten class's walking course. As I was mulling this over in my confused mind, Matt suddenly exploded.
Shut up, you little brat! What did I tell you about how you can't talk bullshit, huh? Keep quiet and stop saying nonsense. Take her away.
Stacy froze in shock at his insults, and Mrs. Steinberg hurriedly took her out of the room. Matt, now looking quite flustered, started to apologize to the guest.
I really must apologize, everyone. My daughter takes pleasure in being a little mischievous, and she very often lies to her own parents. A habitual liar, essentially, nothing we can't handle.
He just insulted our daughter again. My anger ignited, and I retorted, Stacy is not a liar.
How dare you teach her to speak in such a way to adults?
Mr. Crispin thankfully interrupted our argument.
Instead of yelling at each other, how about we truly resolve this? Let's ask her again.
At his request, I went back to Stacy's room and set her down really gently and asked her why she said those things. Stacy, who was crying by this point, replied,
When I was sleeping with a fever, Daddy and that woman came home, and I saw them hugging each other.
When you were sleeping with a fever? You mean when Mommy went to buy medicine? Stacy nodded. Mrs. Steinberg was at a loss. She was scratching her head as she listened to her granddaughter. I didn't blame her. It was all so sudden and so unbelievable. But, come to think of it, I still had a video of Stacy at home when she had a fever on my phone. Remember the pet camera? I checked the footage again, and this time I realized something that I'd overlooked the previous times, and that changed everything. Furious, I returned to the living room, only to find Gwen crying and expressing her shock at having been insulted in such a way. Matt was apologizing to her and to everyone else. Hunter and Andrew were trying to console her with some jokes, and it seemed to be working, despite it being evidently awkward. Mr. Crispin had a rather solemn look on his face. As Matt started chastising me upon my return, I disregarded everything he said and held out my phone to everyone. On the screen was an image of my daughter getting out from under the covers and peeking in through the door that led from the front door to the living room. The footage was silent, but then I turned up the volume and a conversation between a man and a woman could be clearly heard. Hold me, Matthew, darling. Hold me tighter.
I love you, Gwendolyn. You are always the only one.
I love you too. Oh, Matthew, darling.
Well, wait a minute. There's my daughter's bag.
Wait, what? I thought no one was home. Footsteps approached the door where Stacy was eavesdropping, and she hurried back under the covers and closed her eyes. Oh my God, is your wife home?
No, just my daughter. She's asleep. But if Stacy's here, that bitch should be back soon. Let's get you out of here fast. You go down the fire escape as usual.
Then I heard them leave through the front door, and mere minutes later, I came back through the same door. I hadn't seen or heard anything when I came back in, but to think that something like this was going on in my own house. I was watching my daughter while I shopped that day, but I had the volume turned off so as to avoid disturbing other shoppers and didn't notice the talking. There was a few seconds of deadly silence in the room after we finished watching the video on my phone. Eventually, Mr. Crispin asked Gwen in a voice that contained heartbroken fury.
Do you have anything to say?
This has got to be some kind of mistake. I asked my own husband. So, you mean to tell me you were having an affair with this woman?
No. That's just...
How can you call yourself a father if you called your own daughter a liar to cover up your own crimes? The dinner party, which was supposed to be fun, came to an abrupt end, and Hunter and Andrew quickly left the scene. Mr. Crispin dragged the adulterous Gwendolyn home. Mrs. Steinberg and I decided to talk about what to do with the rest of the family. She contacted her husband Erwin and her firstborn son Donovan, and she told me later that they were on their way. I called my own parents too, and Mom was on her way as well. Matt was silent the whole time, dripping with sweat. After a while, both families arrived, and we had a family meeting amidst a very solemn, heavy atmosphere. My brother-in-law and his wife took my daughter out for a drive, as there was no way any of us would let her stay here. To think that a few hours ago, we were having a pleasant dinner party here. What a sudden turn of events. I told everyone present how I honestly felt right then. I can't allow myself to forgive my husband who cheated on me with his boss's fiance, and in my own house, no less. I'm going to take my daughter and leave this house. To which Matt responded,
I'll break up with her. We were just both having a little bit of fun. Nothing serious.
I felt nothing but contempt for this bastard. My in-laws told me that even if my husband indeed broke up with his lover, he would be socially sanctioned for having an affair with the fiancé of his boss at work, and they wanted me to support him as his wife. While understandable, it was ridiculous, and such a request angered Mom, who demanded to know what exactly I was to them in their eyes. The fact they fell silent at that question made me lose respect for my in-laws, to be quite honest. I finally asked Matt, considering the situation, do you really think we can start over?
That's all up to you, isn't it? I'll only say I don't want a divorce.
You know, you haven't said even a single word of apology to me since you were exposed.
If I apologize, would you forgive me? If you promise you will, then sure, I'll apologize for what I did.
My in-laws must have lost interest in defending my husband's unfaithful attitude because they made a complete 180 and agreed to proceed with the divorce. I decided to move out of the house, but I felt sorry for Stacy, so I decided to move to a month-to-month rental apartment that was still close to her kindergarten commuting distance. Then, my in-laws offered to pay for the entire move. At first, I was going to refuse, but when Donovan and his wife contacted me, telling me that Mrs. Steinberg had been so regretful of trying to protect their son from his sin, and that she'd been worrying so much about her granddaughter, that made me be more flexible, and I decided to go see her to thank her for helping me with the expenses. My parents-in-law apologized for the things they said to protect their son at that time. They are important grandparents to my daughter, so I decided to continue to have a relationship with them without getting emotionally involved. After much thinking, I decided to go for a mediated divorce. The main reason is that all the details of the divorce and the agreement would be recorded in the family court. I thought about hiring a lawyer, but I heard that I could arrange one after the mediation, so I only had to pay a few dozen bucks in real terms instead of something far more expensive. I had to attend each meeting, but it was easier mentally because I could have discussions with a mediator in between without negotiating directly with Matt. The mediator explained my husband's recent situation to me during each session, and I heard that my husband had gone to the trouble of hiring a lawyer and was constantly asking for a reduction in the alimony I demanded him. The reason being that my husband's boss, Mr. Crispin, who terminated his engagement to Gwendolyn, was also demanding him alimony, and the company had decided to transfer him to a regional office as punishment for non-compliance, and it was pretty obvious that he would suffer financially. Gwen also resigned from the company voluntarily after breaking up with her fiancé. I was planning to discuss alimony with her later, so Mr. Crispin had given me her contact information. Matt and I finalized our divorce after about 3 sessions of mediation, and the alimony and child support were left to the discretion of the court, who ruled that Matt's crime was one malicious adultery and ordered $30,000 in alimony. Child support was also ordered based on a reasonable calculation, $500 per month until the child reached the age of 19. In drafting the post-will of the settlement, I strongly requested that the contents of the will include an apology to my daughter as her father. I was so insistent that I asked him to rewrite it many times to make sure he would not make it sound too lax. I wanted to make sure that my husband's remorse and apology to his daughter were recorded so that when she grew up, she would not blame herself for thinking that her words had driven her parents to divorce. More than alimony or child support, what I needed to leave behind for Stacy in this divorce was a life of no regrets. After the divorce, she and I moved to a new house in time for the new school year, and with the help of my parents, I plan to raise her as a single mother. Dad runs his own business, and with proper training, he offered me a job at headquarters. Next year, Stacy will be 7 years old and will start elementary school. I know it's a little early, but we went to the store 8 months before school to look for nice school bags.
Mommy, I want this bag. It's so cute.
It really is cute, honey. But you know, there will be new ones in a little while. So how about we wait a little bit?
but I want it now.
I laughed at her little outburst. From the bottom of my heart, I hope my daughter will live a happy life.